Concepts of clan also in most societies, a little more vague in Asian societies than it is, for example, here in the Pacific, but certainly in Pacific Island societies. Uh, One of the other aspects of ancestors that's really key, in other words, the clan ancestors, so Kamapuaa, Pele, etc., would be that the ancestor is largely responsible for the giving out of life energy. This is oftentimes known as, if you're in here in the Pacific, it'd be mana. In Asia, it's called chi, but it's the same thing. Most societies have some sort of concept of mana. In fact, the term was borrowed from the Hawaiian and is actually used in anthropology typically, but it's actually the Hawaiian word, which makes it sort of complicated, I guess. So it's actually now a technical term in anthropology for a particular concept of sort of the ritual part of existence. But it's also, of course, here in Hawaii, it's actually a Hawaiian word and a Hawaiian concept. So we'll use it in the Hawaiian concept. Well, both. So when you're looking at the concept of mana or chi, it's a form of energy. And it usually be defined as life energy. We're going to use some visual examples from Asia simply because I've got them. It's hard to visualize mana in the Hawaiian sense because it's oftentimes entirely imbued in the landscape. There's a rock on campus, for example, that has a lot of mana. There's places, there's trees, there's all sorts, there's locations, there's even mist that has mana. So to the traditional Hawaiian concept, mana existed in all sorts of places in the landscape. What it had in common, there's almost invariably was some sort of a thing or ancestor that was actually responsible for that mana. In other words, the mana just didn't exist in the natural world. It was generated or tapped or channeled by something. And the same is true in Asia, though. In Asia, it becomes almost a little more structured. If you go in for acupuncture or acupressure, for example, what they're actually doing is moving the mana or chi in your body to different locations. And that's actually certified, at least in most Western medical systems, being as effective. Though Western medicine has no acceptance of the concept of mana or chi. So the concept of mana or chi is central to us for two reasons. One is that it's based in place. So particular locations had mana or chi. Particular locations could also take it away. And there was a whole part of the ritual structure of the Hawaiian system tied to a set of specialists who basically are what we call geomantic specialists. And in China, they would call these feng shui people. But in the Hawaiian context, these were a form of tonga whose job was basically to look at the landscape, analyze the landscape, and look at the flow of mana in the landscape to maximize the benefits and minimize the risk. You've actually got that as your readings. That's your Waialeale readings on Hawaiian geomancy. That's the only extent text we actually have. There might be more stuff in the newspapers, but so far we've had no luck in finding it. I'm sure it's in there somewhere. We just haven't been able to locate them yet. So this is the only actual in-print text. If you go into the Chinese system, which is probably the most sophisticated, you can find thousands of pages. You can go to something like, as we'll see later, Joey Yap, and you actually have huge, modern website systems based on basically the daily application of chi or mana. It's similar in the Hawaiian concept to the Asian concept. It's not quite the same thing. The major differences we'll see later would be the idea of when you're born. Mana in the Hawaiian concept, as the rest of Polynesia, was directly tied and almost exclusively tied to the ancestor. So it didn't matter what year or day you were born, your relationship with the ancestor defined your mana. And so in that concept, let's take a look at a couple of images because it's sort of hard for me to show you how this works. So we're gonna steal two Japanese examples just because they're real good examples of this, and I think it'll help you guys visualize if you're not familiar with it. This is Hida Village. It's a Japanese version of Williamsburg. A very wealthy Japanese guy about 30, 40 years ago was concerned about the loss of rural forest or rural buildings. And so he went and bought this piece of property outside of the town of Takayama and went and imported buildings from all over Japan and made it into sort of like this fantasy rural village. So it's not, in its own way, it's no more real than Williamsburg. It's a modern interpretation of the past. Having said that, there's parts that make it really interesting, and this is one of them. According to one of the caretakers we bumped into when we were looking at this place, there was a large tree here somewhere, not right here, but somewhere in this area. When it was cut down, Some of the guys that were doing the work, the construction guys, felt that they had really ended up with trouble. And so in the Japanese concept, what you have is the concept of spirits called kami. And to a certain extent, they're not quite ancestors because they're not directly related to you per se, but they are place-based. So for example, this big tree here might have a kami, I don't know. But there was a tree down here that did have a kami. When they cut and pulled the tree out, everyone had a distinct sense that they had done something, something was now pissed off at them. And so what they did is they found either the rock was already here, or they found it. I couldn't understand what he was saying. I think he said the rock was already here, but they shifted a little bit. And what the guys did that did the construction work is they started leaving little food offerings to the spirit around here to apologize for the damage they did and to make it so that it'd be more benign towards them and less, prone to being vindictive. And in the Japanese concept, kami can be very vindictive. And the way they do this, one of the main ways they do this is by taking away chi in people. So they not only haunt people, but most importantly, they actually take away life energy from people. And if you have this concept of life energy, which most societies have, then anything that has life has the energy in it. So anything that has mana or chi is actually alive. Anything in which all the mana or chi has been taken away from is now dead or just, neutral. And so the guys were adamant that this rock now has the spirit from the tree moved into the rock. And so this rock now is a kami, or more accurately, the kami resides in this. This is its house, if you want to think of it. The spirit up here is sort of a marker that's used to point out this is a kami. Now, other people that go by, us included, but especially there were some school kids around there. Teacher was lecturing them, but you got to leave a little bit of money. It doesn't have to be much anything. It has to be a small gift to make the kami happy, to acknowledge the presence of the kami, to show some respect, if you would. And if you do that, then the kami, at a minimum, the kami won't give you a hard time. So the kami won't take life energy away from you. If the kami is really impressed, then the kami will actually give you more life energy. Now, mana is a real interesting concept because life energy is oftentimes nowadays, and it's sort of the modern concept here used nowadays here, is mana is seen as sort of a form of energy, but it's also tied to luck. So if you have a lot of mana, good things will happen to you. That's not how traditionally mana worked. Mana didn't make things happen. Mana changed the potential or probability of something occurring. But if you did something stupid, you were still going to pay. If you were prone to doing the right thing, then you were going to do the right thing regardless of this. So mana, for example, mana wouldn't make you COVID immune. Lack of mana wouldn't make you catch COVID. But lack of mana would mean if you're in a situation where someone had COVID and you could catch it, there's a better probability that the virus will get to you and into your body. If you have a lot of mana, there's a better probability that, maybe you'll inhale at the right time or something like that, and the COVID virus will not enter your body. So putting yourself in a position of risk is your problem. Mana won't make you invulnerable or make you vulnerable. Mana will make the potential of that happening different. It's a really important distinction. I think most people, especially here in Hawaii, don't understand today. But it's very much part of this Japanese concept. So even though there isn't the familial relationship, traditional Hawaiians would have absolutely no trouble understanding what was going on here. And the fascinating thing is, except for the guy that's the caretaker, who actually knew on the construction crew, wasn't part of the crew. There's, the construction crew's gone on to other jobs. And yet what you find is this is not only here. The caretaker said he didn't put the red cloth on the image, but someone else did. But he did put the bamboo, or I can't remember what the cutting is here. And every week someone comes by and takes the money out of the box and puts it in a little, container. And when they have enough, they either buy, mochi or some other offering, or maybe new cloth for the figure. You'll see these things all over Japan. You'll see them, in Tokyo, right in the middle of urban areas, right in the middle of a city. Oftentimes, a little sort of to a Westerner, they might look like a bird box or some sort of little decorative thing. What these are is little spirit houses. They're oftentimes what I think to translate best into English. And these are where kami reside. So kami, unlike a lot of other places, kami in Japan continue to reside somewhere, even if you've taken away their original house. But if you'd wiped out the kami's house and you didn't put any respect here, then you're going to have a real pissed off, vengeful spirit that's going to start taking kami away from people who go by just because it's bitter and it wants someone to, feel its anger or its angst. So this is one example of kami. This is probably to Hawaiians, this would be a very typical one. I think for the Euro-American concept, this is really hard for people to grasp, especially for Americans, because they're a migratory group. Think like folks going to Williamsburg. You clear the forest, you completely convert into something new, or you build into subdivision, you bulldoze everything. There's no sense of place, and there's no sense of what you might call the ritual importance of places or things in place. This is another example. This is the axis deer. This is the same deer that's causing so much trouble in Molokai right now. The axis deer, or the Japanese deer, is sometimes called. This is in the city of Nara. This is near in the area of the large temple complex. Nara was one of the imperial capitals, about 700 or 800 years ago. And one of the reasons it became the imperial, well, it's not, it's sort of a chicken and the egg thing here, but there's a series of kami that cluster around a lake or large pond here. And many of those kami, I don't know if you want to call it possess or inhabit the bodies of deer. So when you go to Nara, the deer they're untouchable. You can't attack them, you can't chase them, you can't even give them a hard time. If you do, you get arrested. If it would be a really bad thing to do, just for a bunch of reasons. So the deer are considered, quote, sacred. Now, the interesting thing is a lot of the deer are just deer. So it's not so much the animal itself, it's the fact that this particular species, this particular animal, in this particular location, kami that are in that area like to hang out in the deer. So it's sort of like, 90% of the time, these are just animals hanging around being deer. The other 10% of the time, or some of them, will all of a sudden start to act differently. And at that point, the general assumption is one of the kami, just like the one in the rock, I've decided to go into the deer, maybe to go hang around, cruise around it. Who knows what kami do. So at that point, what you might say is the deer doesn't necessarily have a lot of mana individually, but the deer collectively have a lot of mana because the kami in the area tend to, if you almost maybe infest them, might be the best way to say it. And so since you don't know whether the deer you're interacting with is it just a deer, or whether it's got a spirit inside of it, which again can either be benign and give you mana, or if you piss it off or whack it or chase it or give it a hard time, can take mana away. It means that people are going to be really careful about this because you don't know if this has a kami inside of it, but the kami knows what you're doing. So it's like a one-way mirror. You don't know what's going on, but the spirit does. And this is a hugely important part of both clans and also the relationship of mana and place here in Hawaii, is that the ancestors and the things that are in the place know what's going on. The people that are actually living in that area don't necessarily know, but they've got to act as if there's things around, and you've got to be aware that there are things around, and messing with those or not taking those seriously can have all sorts of consequences, many of which are going to be rather subtle. So in a traditional Hawaiian context, not doing the same right thing at the right place might result in someone getting ill a week or two later, or something goes wrong, maybe they crash their bicycle or something. On one hand, it's their skill that made it happen. On the other hand, the fact that it happened to them at that point in time at that place might very well be attributed to a decrease in the amount of mana, because at some point something that they had been around or an ancestor was not happy with them and took some of the mana away from them. As we'll see as we get into this a little further, in the later period, if you did particular rituals, chiefs, ari'i, could generate mana. But in the earlier period, mana was entirely the provenience of ancestors and spirits. So the world was a place that had the living, and the world was the place that had these other things. These other things had control over the life energy of the living. The living did not have the ability to control the life energy, even in themselves per se. So life energy it was something that you were given. It's something that you had to be careful about, and it's something you had to be careful about the landscape around you, because there were things around there that could basically take it from you, at which point you're dead. So mana and chi, same thing. The Japanese concept is deer has chi. If there's a spirit in it, it has a ton of chi. If not, it's just a deer, and because it's alive and wandering around, it has chi 'cause it has life energy. If I want to put it in another context, this tree, I don't know, I don't think so, but this tree can actually have a kami residing in it. So at that point, the tree is alive. Now, at some point, if you think about that other image, the rock was alive. So things that are we consider inanimate in the Western sense can be animated. Things that might be considered animate in the Western sense aren't necessarily animated in the concept of mana or chi. So it's just a different way of looking at the world around you and your relationship with the world around you. Probably the really key one that's very, very true both in the Asian and the Pacific Island version is that people are very vulnerable. We're not in a position of control. If you think about the classic Calvinist logic, the only person we're responsible to is God. Because when you die and you go to heaven, you get judged on whether you're good or bad. So it's God that basically, scores. In the world of mana or chi, in the world of the traditional Hawaii, there were all sorts of things out there, and people were very much at the second or third tier of all this. If you go to the Kumalipo, for example, you find out that even plants like dalo are considered the older brother of people. So even vegetables, in a modern concept, were superior and had more mana and more ability to control mana than people did. So people were not in a position of superiority. People were not in a decision of making decisions about the rest of the world. In the traditional Hawaiian concept, I can't imagine that people would have ever thought of having a zoo, for example, and that would be surreal. Um, so this is a very, very different world that these folks interacted with and lived in and then basically functioned in.